And we like to start this morning with that sense of community and the sense of gratitude and reverence for our Earth. And I also loved the ties to who we are and what our purpose is, which brings us to the next part of our program. So I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Pedja Stojicic. He is the Executive Director of People Power Health, in addition to a very long biography that I encourage you to read in our program guide. And he's going to tell us about the theory of building a movement.
Let me see. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think we can do a little better than that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, that's good. Well, this is a hard one to follow.
It's a hard one.
And so as Lisa said, my name is Pedja Stojicic, and I'm the Executive Director of People Power Health and faculty at Harvard School of Public Health. But the idea of us connecting with the Earth is really powerful, and I hope we can kind of keep that throughout the day as we do these sessions. I think the reason why we're starting with my conversation here is probably because we need a wake-up call. So,
We're awake.
yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. But I want to ask you a question to begin with. Raise your hand if you feel courageous. Wow, okay. So I have a follow-up question then. Why do you feel courageous? What makes you feel courageous in this moment in time? And just whoever wants to shout out, like, what? Hope? What else? Grandkids. What else?
Crisis.
What else? Injustice.
History.
Values.
Okay. Indignation. Wow. What about community? Oh, yeah. I asked that question because, I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself that is not in a bio. I grew up in Yugoslavia, a country that doesn't exist anymore. And now it's Belgrade, Serbia. And throughout the years that I was growing up, we had something for some of you to know, like what was happening in the Balkans is the civil war. And we also had a dictatorship in Serbia led by Milosevic, who was also known as the butcher of the Balkans, like for those who don't remember that time or don't remember what was happening in that really vicious civil war that I grew up with. And I always say I was lucky enough because I was not old enough to be drafted and taken to the war, but also not so blessed because I was old enough to understand what was going on and how the things were going. And this question of courage was something that we constantly were grappling with as kids, as like as high schoolers, and I was one of them. We joked that we used to live our hobbit lives. Everything was working, and like the things were great, and then all of a sudden you're in the midst of crisis, and you don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. And my discovery of courage came with other people. And it came through a student movement that was starting in 1996, protesting against what was at the time like stolen elections that Milosevic did. And the opposition parties didn't do quite a lot, but students did, like young people. And the first experience that I kind of recollect of feeling that sense of courage was when we were on the streets. There was a Kolarčeva street in Belgrade. It's the center of Belgrade. There was a cordon of police, and then there were students, and we were standing next to each other for days. It was kind of like, standoff, like we stand. And, there were some funny stories and some hard stories there. But the one that I remember, and I wanted to share with you today, is because we were high schoolers, we actually technically could not be there. We were supposed to be in school. That was the thing. But we will kind of get together and say well, this is all lovely. We can learn about history, but we can make history. Let's go there and do that. And we left the school and be on the streets. But one day, we had a philosophy professor, and he was also our math professor. And he came, and he said, like, look, I cannot, with any consciousness, say to you that you should not be here, because you should be here. But I also feel that you also need to learn math and philosophy. So I'm here, and I'm going to do my lecture. So here we are on the streets. He's doing his lecture. We're listening. And we are learning something, not about philosophy, not about math, but what it means to be in a movement, what it means to be with each other. That means that everybody can do their part. It was a lesson in courage. It was a lesson in life, I would say. That it doesn't mean that if you're in a movement, that means that you are only on the streets. As a professor, he found his way into our movement by saying, I'm going to do what I'm doing. I'm going to give you a lecture, despite the fact that we're on the street. And police was puzzled. Like, let me tell you, they were like, what's going on here? But, you know, like, you pick up those lessons and you ask yourself, like, well, this is the kind of moment we're living right now, where having our pieces of the puzzle and connecting them together will be probably the most critical thing that we will have to do. Not to change everything that we're doing, not to say, like, oh, all of a sudden we should all become activists and stuff like that. No, 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 that's not the point here. It's like, how can we find the alignment so we can do this work together in a powerful way that will change the circumstances that we are living. So that was my kind of like lesson in courage. Like that's how you discover courage, and that's the reason why we wanted to have this presentation about theories of change, and kind of like how can you think about movement building, not just like in terms of like what we can do to rebel or resist certain things, but how we can play our roles in this river that we are driving, that we need in order to create the change that we want. So what is a theory of change? You know, it's a fancy name for explaining how the things that you're doing will give you the results that you want. So that's what it is. It's nothing. It's a structured way to connect actions to outcomes in terms of achieving that large-scale change, whatever you want to see as a change. And what is really interesting about this, you know, kind of like struggle, and it's particularly this room, and I personally also grappled with that as well, is the fact that, you know, I after the high school, I went to medical school, but during that time got the bug to kind of like there's a different way of doing this work. And somewhere in the middle of medical school, there was this feeling like, am I failing myself by doing this work outside of the clinical practice? And I don't know if you have those same feelings, like sometimes, like, well, maybe this is just a waste of time. Maybe this is not too much. Maybe I should just like focus on treating one patient at a time, or focusing on my clinic. And you know, no judgment, that's all good. But for me, it was really a thinking about how do we discover that this is also healing? That the healing is what drives us. And when we heard this Land's acknowledgement, it was the healing that actually allowed us to see, oh, this is the connection between who we are and what we do. And in the same way, in a movement, once you start seeing the connection between what you do and a larger picture, that's when you know that you're actually doing something really, really powerful, and something that can change the trajectory of the things that you're doing. So our health movement, climate health movement, is not a one single thing, it's an ecology. It's a group of things that people are doing. So let me ask a question. How many of you, raise your hand, if you're doing something to educate people? Wow, okay, a lot of educators here. So there's a role for that. There's a role for informing and educating and letting people know about the consequences of this. How about, like, how many of you, raise your hand if you're doing some advocacy work, like legislative work? Okay, wow, this is a kind of like, there's an overlap here already. What about the work in the communities to make communities resilient, to enable adaptation? Okay, a little less, but like still a high number of people. What about transformation of the hospitals and health centers and stuff like that is happening there? Okay. Yeah, trying. You know. And then what about the work of uniting, getting all these pieces together? Okay, wow, this is amazing. How do you feel about each other? Yeah. But let's be honest about it for a second. You know, because that is the part of the deal here with theories of change. You can get married to your theory of change, and it happens a lot in social movements. They just say like, you know, I respect these advocates and what they're doing, but you know what? We need to educate people. That's our job. And that's where should we put all of our energy. Or advocates would say like, oh, these education and public awareness campaigns, those are good, but there's no action in it. Like, you know, we really need to do the other stuff. Or the people working in transformation, they would say like, yeah, this is all great, but if we don't incorporate in business models and change hospitals. So sometimes you hear that voice, and that voice is a problem. Because the moment we start hearing that voice, and if you're honest with yourself, you will hear it, especially when you're applying for funding and trying to kind of like, also, that is the voice that in this current moment, we cannot afford to have. And I hope if you remember anything from this initial conversation here, is that whenever you hear that voice, you should ask yourself, like, why am I hearing it? And how can I transform that voice into something productive? How can I see, not that we are a different people, not that we are different, kind of like have a different goal, but that we actually have different skill sets that will allow us to achieve the goals of the movement. If you're in the education research and evidence, for example, you are actually shifting the policy arguments. You are shifting the narratives. If you're in the education, you're mobilizing professional awareness and doing that. If you're doing advocacy and policy work, you're targeting political pillars. You're creating regulatory change. If you're working in healthcare systems change, you're reducing sectors' carbon footprint. If you're community organizing and unity, you're strengthening grassroots resilience. So you can see yourself based on the skills that you provide to the movement. And that is a different shift in terms of how you can think about these things and how you can enable all of us to work together. Does that make sense? Does that resonate to some extent? So whenever you hear that voice like, oh, my theory of change is the best one. This is, if we just had more of that, kill it. Kill that voice. Because I want to tell you a story which was not planned when Lisa and I planned this session, actually, but then events happened. So when all these things started, like, you know, early January, and you know what I'm talking about, I don't have to explicitly say what I'm talking about, but we all know. I called my friend Pedja. He was a leader of that movement that I was talking in Serbia, Otpor movement, and he wrote an amazing book, Blueprint for Revolution. If you're looking for a funny and exciting book about how to make change, that one is the good one. Like, it's really, really fun. And Blueprint for Revolution, Srđa Popović is his name. And I call him because he's my wisdom guy. Like, he's the one that trained so many nonviolent social movements across the world after Serbia. Like, he knows every single piece about anything in around the world. And I said, like, what is happening here? Can you help me understand what's going on? And he said, and I was actually calling him just to confirm the bad news. He said, well, you know what's going on. We've seen it. We've been here. But then I said, like, but well, how are we going to respond to it? And he said, well, let me tell you a story. Like, you live in Boston, and you drive a car, and I don't know which car you're driving, but let's assume that you're driving a Toyota Prius. And you can drive that car comfortably in Boston because the streets are okay. Even if it's cold weather, you can still drive the Toyota Prius. But he lives in Colorado right now and said, like, if you come to Colorado and you want to go off-road and you want to be in the high altitude, good luck with Toyota Prius. Whatever you want to kind of like think about the world and whatever, you will need an SUV. And I said, like, well, let's do an electric one, e-SUV in Colorado. So, Pedja, you have to understand this moment in the context of that thing. The Toyota Prius is what we used to have. Oh, there's a change in government. Okay, we might disagree with that. Let's do our things. Let's do our incremental advocacy. That will lead in 2 years in kind of like some kind of shift. We can take Congress, whatever. There will be a political shift. Things will move on and progress. That is the Toyota Prius thinking. It's not going to help us in this current moment in time. It's the SUV that we need to get on because it's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be a bumpy road, and then bumpy road requires a different way of thinking, going back to the theory of change. Not the one that we feel like, oh, we just need to do our thing in the movement and we're going to be fine. Yes, we need to do our thing in the movement, but also we need to think about how to connect those things in one particular way. And he reminded me of the quote that we are always using in the lectures is like there are two types of movements, successful and spontaneous. Let me repeat that. So there are two types of movements, successful and spontaneous. Those who think that spontaneously things can happen, good luck. What we also need to think about is these three things. How do we achieve, in this moment in time, vision and unity? How, you can find a way to say, like, what is the vision? What is the purpose that we are doing? And it seems like there's a clarity about that, like at least in this room, how we want to do that. But the question of unity, not a unity of thought, not that everybody has to think the same way, not the unity of like everybody's doing the same thing, but the unity of commitment. The unity of commitment in terms of kind of like how we're going to do certain things. But the second thing, planning and strategy, it's actually really critical. And what you will see hopefully throughout those 2 days is how this conference is allowing you to develop a planning and strategy in a collective way. Not individual planning, but like how do you start seeing where do I fit? What is my part? How am I contributing to this large movement? And then finally, there's a need for strong structure. Like something that will hold you together. And I'm so happy. That's why I asked her, where do you find the courage? And somehow we forgot that the main source of courage is the community, is being with each other as much as you can so you can start seeing how these structures can go in one direction and flow in one direction. Does that make sense? So 3 simple things, vision and unity, planning and strategy, and then finally, strong structure, strong organization. What I would add to this is probably, going back to the SUV, electric SUV analogy, we also need to start thinking creatively. And that means doing something that we call like a moral jiu-jitsu, You will be stopped from doing certain things, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop doing them. I can give you one example that is in Serge's books that we always love to tell, is like, sometimes you cannot get on the streets and protest because you're going to get arrested. That was our reality in Serbia. But what we did one day is put a barrel on the streets of Belgrade and a stick and a face of Milosevic on that barrel. And we said, if you're stuck with this system, you can hit the barrel and put some money in it. And then people started coming. And they come in, they see that, well, I want to hit the barrel. And they hit the barrel, and it creates a noise. And it becomes loud, really fast. And people start getting excited, and then kind of like hitting, and then and police was looking at that, and they didn't know what to do. Because they were thinking, what should we do with this? There's nobody to arrest. These people are just kind of like passing, they hit the barrel, they move on. Like, it's creating the noise, everybody's seeing it. The media started kind of taking pictures of that, whatnot. So eventually they arrested the barrel. And you can imagine tomorrow, and we were there, like people were there to take a photo of that. And tomorrow is in newspapers. It was all over the newspapers. And everybody was laughing. And as they laughed, as you are right now, they started breaking the fear. They started seeing like, oh, this is not, they think they're powerful, but they're not actually. Look at this. It was just a barrel and they couldn't leave it on the street. Another example, which I think it's even more hilarious, they stopped from us from blocking the streets. You cannot block the streets. You're going to be immediately. So people said like, well, what are we going to do? We cannot block the streets. Well, there's this thing where you cross the street legally, yeah? All of a sudden people kind of stand in line and then they cross the street in a circle. So technically we're not blocking anything. We're just crossing the street from one place to another. So you see how this works. So that type of thinking is an SUV type of thinking. It cannot be that you will stay in a lane and and obey, because the power of disobedience is what we can rely on right now, quite a bit. To say like, look, we're not going to accept the reality. We're not going to go fight you in a crazy way that will create a lot of conflict, because we don't want people to die or people to be hurt or anything. But we can fight with our creativity, with the way we can kind of start thinking about these things and connecting them together so they become a river that can change the course of history. I've seen it happening in many places, and I think it can happen here. So, in the meantime, there's also a good idea, and I see my friend Garb Basu. Garb, can you raise your hand here? For the last 5 years, we've been doing Climate Health Organizing Fellowship. Raise your hand if you were a Climate Health Organizing Fellow. We have few. Yes, let's celebrate them. And the purpose of that was not to train people in climate science or how they do research or the purpose of that was to train them in community organizing and movement building skills. And we're going to keep doing that, I think, in some ways and shapes and forms. But I really invite you to think about, in addition to whatever you're doing, how you can equip yourself with that kind of thinking and those types of skills. In whatever shape and form you want to get that, because it will allow you to see what you will not be able to see if you're still in a Toyota Prius moment. And that kind of shift from that can actually shift and help all of us create change in a completely different way. My own way to contribute to that, alongside with the Climate Health Organizing Fellowship that we do every year, and it's a smaller thing, we also started the Courageous Clinicians Community. It's the idea of really simple idea, get together and learn these skills alongside of these things. You don't have to, I'm just saying that there are places where you can do that. And I hope as we go along in this movement that alongside of education, advocacy, transformation, community resilience, all of these wonderful things that you're doing as healthcare professionals, we will equip ourselves to think about how we can also be movement builders, because in the years to come, I think and I feel that's going to be a critical part of the equation. So with that, I think I'm done.